Yeah.
Here we go. It is the biggest game of the year. It's been one of the most highly anticipated matchups of the year. And now we finally get to see how it all plays out. Number 3 Georgia, number 2 Alabama, under the lights Saturday night in Tuscaloosa. You can't ask for anything better. So welcome back to the Gridiron Expert, breaking down everything you need to know for this huge matchup. Huge when it comes to college football playoff implications, where the winner of this game is going to be sitting relatively pretty, and the loser is going to have very little room for error over the remainder of this season. So we're going to talk offense, we're going to talk defense, we're going to talk trends, we're going to talk about everything you need to know for Bama, Georgia on Saturday night, and at the end, who we have winning this top 3 matchup. So let's take a look at a few notes here before we really dive into the statistics here. First things first, Alabama, as of this filming, is a 6-point favorite going into this game. So nearly a touchdown favorite over the Bulldogs, despite only beating Ole Miss 63-48 just last week, allowing over 600 yards of offense to the Rebels. And we'll touch on that in a second. But Alabama, 6-point favorites going into this game. That spread, of course, brought to you by betnow.eu. Make sure to check out that link to their site down in the description below. Use our promo code GRIDIRON over there for that 100% sign-up bonus. You can bet on this game. You can bet on all college football games, NFL, MLB, getting close to the World Series. Anything you want and more can be found over at BetNow. We've loved working with them. It's the site that we use. It is one of the best, if not the best, betting sites out there right now. So make sure to go give them a look. Use that promo code GRIDIRON. Not only are they the best place to go, but they have some of the best spreads and opportunities there as well. So Bama, nearly a touchdown favorite. The FPI also favoring Alabama, just like Vegas is favoring Bama, giving the Crimson Tide a 60.6% chance to win this game. Some look at that as a little high. Some may look at that as pretty low, considering this is the mighty Alabama that we're talking about here, only getting almost a 61% chance to win this game. When you look at some trends here, Alabama has won 5 straight games against Georgia. We mentioned that in our Week 7 predictions video. Alabama has won 5 straight against the Bulldogs. That includes 2 in about a span of 11 months in 2018, when they beat Georgia in that national championship game in January. And then in the 2018 season, the two met again in the SEC championship game, where Jalen Hurts became the hero after getting benched in that national title game and led the Crimson Tide to a late comeback win over the Bulldogs, keeping Georgia and Kirby Smart out of the college football playoff. So Alabama has won 5 straight. Nick Saban is now beating Kirby Smart for the 3rd time since Smart left Alabama, where he was defensive coordinator, to become the head coach at Georgia. It is the 3rd time they will be meeting on Saturday. Nick Saban, as we mentioned, winning both of those matchups. And Nick Saban is 21-0, undefeated against former assistant coaches. That includes the wins over Kirby Smart. That includes last week's win over Lane Kiffin. Again, not a great performance from Alabama, but a win is a win, and Saban gets to keep that record intact. The question is, can he keep that record intact when everything is done late Saturday night? So let's take a look here. Let's take a look at the offenses first. And let's start actually with Alabama. Let's start with the home team, because Alabama, to me, has a very clear advantage on the offensive side of the ball. I really don't think it's up for much discussion, especially when you look at the numbers when you look at how both teams have played so far this season. The Crimson Tide are averaging 51 points per game this year. They're averaging 560.3 rushing yards, or 560.3 total yards per game this year. And, people were concerned with Alabama's offense going into 2020. They were like, well, you lose Tua Tagovailoa, you lose Jerry Jeudy, you lose Henry Ruggs, you lose so much offensive firepower. Are they going to even be any good? They haven't missed a beat. They have looked just as good as they were last year when Tua was healthy. They look just fine. And Mac Jones deserves a lot of credit for the offensive success. Over 1,100 yards so far this season. 8 touchdowns, just 1 interception for the Crimson Tide. He has completed 79.5% of his passes. He's been accurate. He's been on the money. He delivers a great deep ball. And that's something that Georgia's defense, which we'll talk about soon, is going to have to be prepared for. Alabama also has a great balance. Not as balanced as Georgia offensively, but they're averaging almost 400 passing yards per game. They're averaging 175.3 rushing yards per game, led by Najee Harris, who had over 200 rushing yards last week against Ole Miss, has 347 yards and 10 total touchdowns on the year. 10 rushing touchdowns already this season for Alabama, for Najee Harris, and he's only played in 3 games. So this is pretty impressive, guys. Alabama owns that offensive edge. It's cut and dry because they're much more explosive. They're a lot more faster, and they have that big playability that I don't really think Georgia has right now. At least I haven't seen out of Georgia. Alabama has scored 20 offensive touchdowns this season. 6 of those have come from 20 yards out or more. So 6 of their 20 touchdowns have come from 20 yards out or more, 20 plus yards, and that's something that we haven't seen out of Georgia. They're lighting teams up left and right. They've dominated in every game they've played in, but hasn't dominated nearly as offensively as Alabama has. So that's something to watch out for here. Georgia, on the other hand, they don't necessarily have a bad offense by any means. I just don't think they're up there at the level of Alabama. But the Bulldogs are led by the mailman, Stetson Bennett. Stetson Bennett. The question is, can the mailman deliver again? He delivered in that second half against Arkansas, where the Bulldogs were struggling up until the point where he came in the game. He delivered against Auburn in that top 10 matchup. And then he delivered last week against Tennessee, a game where the Bulldogs were trailing Bulldogs were trailing 21-17 before winning 44-21, outscoring the Volunteers by 27 in that second half. Stetson Bennett has thrown for 689 yards and 5 touchdowns this year. The stat that's most impressive to me, though, is not how accurate he's been, not the yardage, but the fact that he has thrown 0 interceptions. Stetson Bennett, remember, guys, was not supposed to be the starter this year. 2 months ago, even just a full month ago, you would have looked at Georgia and you would have said, it's going to be Jamie Newman or it's going to be JT Daniels. And neither of them has the job. We know Newman opted out. Daniels wasn't cleared to play in that week 1 opener. Bennett played well, and Kirby Smart said, let's go with it. And look how great it's been working out for them. The Bulldogs are averaging 36 points per game, 420 total yards per game. And we mentioned, the Bulldogs are more balanced than Alabama, at least when you look at the numbers. 248 passing yards a game, 172 rushing yards per game. They are led by Zamir White at running back with 209 yards and 4 touchdowns on the year. The one thing that is a strength for Georgia offensively that I don't really think Alabama has because of their big playability is Georgia so far in their 3 games has dominated the time of possession, and that's going to be a major key in this game, something we will talk about later in this video. But you look at Georgia so far, they have held the ball in their 3 games for 32 minutes and 46 seconds longer than their opponents. So they are averaging about 11 extra minutes per game against their opponents. They are averaging where they hold the ball more. So they are owning the time of possession by about 11 minutes per game against their 3 opponents. Again, Arkansas, Auburn, and Tennessee. And that's huge. That is huge. When Georgia can go out there and dominate the time of possession, if they can do that against this Alabama team, one that is so explosive offensively, you keep that offense off the field, the Crimson Tide can't score. And so that's the thing for Georgia. They might not be as explosive. They might not be as fast. They might not be anything like Ole Miss was to Alabama last year. But they are methodical. They are smart. And I think that if they can continue to do that and own the time of possession in this game, that the Bulldogs have a very, very good chance to go into Bryant-Denny Stadium at night and win this game. So you look at the offense, guys. Bama, their strength, speed, explosiveness, big plays. Georgia, not too far behind, a lot of talent, but they're a little bit slower, a little bit more methodical. Anything, though, that Georgia lacks offensively, they make up for with their defense. The Bulldogs have the top defense in the country, guys, and if you disagree with that, tell me in the comments who you think's better. Only other team in the country that might have a better defense than Georgia, and I'm still not sold completely, is Clemson. Not saying that Clemson has a bad defense, but if you put me on the spot, I would side with the Bulldogs right now. Because Georgia just held Tennessee to -1 rushing yards in the entire game. Clemson didn't do that. Clemson allowed too many points to Wake Forest. I know they were garbage time points. I know they allowed too many points to Virginia. We're not talking about Clemson. We're talking about Georgia here, though. Again, they are the best defense in the country. 12.3 points per game allowed this season. They're allowing just 236.7 total yards per game. You see those stats from some quarterbacks. Quarterback will go out there and throw for 237, sometimes more. That's not what they're doing. That's not passing yards per game. It's 236.7 total yards per game for Georgia this season. And that includes just 38.3 rushing yards per game through 3 games. Again, let that sink in. 38.3 rushing yards per game they are allowing through just 3 games this season. Again, they held Tennessee last week to -1 rushing yards in that game, that 44-21 victory. The problem for Georgia's defense, if you had to find one, if you had to find some weakness, would probably be their passing game. They're probably their passing defense. They allowed 215 yards and 2 touchdowns to Jarrett Garantano at Tennessee last weekend. I hate to break it to you Volunteer fans, but Mac Jones and his core of wide receivers, they're better than Tennessee's. So you look at that for Georgia here. They allowed some big, deep balls in that game to Tennessee. They allowed too many yards to Jarrett Garantano, even though the defense shut him down in the second half. That's going to be kind of your point of emphasis here, shutting down the Alabama passing attack. But outside of that, they're good at stopping the run. They're good at forcing turnovers. Forced 7 turnovers in their 3 games this season. 2 of those 7 turnovers resulting in touchdowns. Pick 6, fumble recovery. Pick 6 against Arkansas, the fumble recovery last week against Tennessee. Monty Rice getting that scoop and score. So Georgia is elite defensively. Their defense, to me, is the equivalent of Alabama's offense, which is why it's such an intriguing battle. It's Bama's offense, really good offense, going up against that really good Georgia defense. Which one's going to give? Which one is going to break? Which one's going to make the most plays to lead their team to victory? Alabama, their defense, obviously a little bit of a concern. I have never seen an Alabama defense play the way they did last week against Ole Miss. I've never seen a Nick Saban-led team play the way they did against Ole Miss. Yes, they came out with the win, and if you want to look at it from an offensive standpoint, it was a beautiful offensive performance. You couldn't be happier with how well Mac Jones and Najee Harris and those guys played. But you couldn't be more angry and more frustrated with the defense. They allowed 647 yards to the Rebels. 647 yards to the Rebels. And through Alabama's 3 games, they are allowing 30.3 points per game. They're allowing 322.3 passing yards per game. And they're allowing 150.7 rushing yards per game. So they are allowing almost 500 total yards per game here, guys. Almost 500 total yards per game. And that's not characteristic of a Nick Saban-led team. Especially a defense that we thought would be a little bit better in 2020 with all those key starters returning from injury from 2019. So again, as we mentioned, Alabama's defense a concern. A couple of things that you Crimson Tide fans should feel a little bit better about is, one, Georgia's offense is not Ole Miss's offense. We said that earlier. Georgia's going to score some points here. No doubt in my mind. But they're not going to rack up the yards and the points like Ole Miss did. That's just not the Bulldogs' style. And that's not going to be their style just for this game. I can promise you that. So they're not nearly as explosive as Ole Miss. This also is Nick Saban we're talking about. If you think that for the biggest game of the year, the biggest game on their schedule, they're not going to make any changes and show any sort of improvement going into this game, you're absolutely wrong. You're very much mistaken. Because Nick Saban's the best coach in the game right now. He's going to correct some things. And this defense might not be great against Georgia, but they're going to look a little bit better. They are certainly going to look a little bit better. When you look at Alabama's defense, kind of like I mentioned with Georgia, they have not forced as many turnovers as the Bulldogs, just 4 through 3 games. So lacking, I would say, in that turnover department. The one thing that Alabama does have going for them, though, is their front 7. They have a pretty dang good pass rush. That defensive line, that linebacking core, obviously a strength for them. They have 5 sacks on the year, though. 5 sacks on the year. Doesn't sound like a lot. They also have 20 tackles for a loss, and that's a pretty good amount when you're looking at that over a span of just 3 games. Over just 3 games for the Crimson Tide. Missouri, Texas A&M, who just beat Florida, looking like a better win now, and then, of course, Ole Miss this past weekend. So that front 7, very dangerous for Alabama, very dangerous for the Crimson Tide, something that the Georgia offensive line, which is always a strength under Kirby Smart and the Bulldogs, something they have to be prepared for in terms of protecting Stetson Bennett, protecting him and allowing him time to get his throws off. That's the key for Alabama, number 1. We talked your offense, we talked your defense. Look at keys for the game. Alabama. Remember, this is Stetson Bennett's first ever start on the road. First ever road start. The Arkansas game doesn't count because he did not start that game. His first ever road start is coming in a top 3 matchup at night at Bryant-Denny Stadium. And he's very lucky that this is not going to be a sold-out crowd. If this game was being played when it was going to originally back in September, week 3 of the season, things would be a little bit different, I would think, especially with a full sold-out crowd. But there's going to be a little bit of a crowd there, and you can bet your money they're going to be as loud as they can, and 20,000, 30,000 people are going to sound like 80 or 90. 100%. You can guarantee that. Alabama needs to get in there and rattle Stetson Bennett and make him uncomfortable. First ever road start, and this is the type of environment, this is the setting. You know his nerves are going to be going a little bit. 100%. So if you get back there, you pressure him, force him into some bad throws, hit him hard a few times, you're going to rattle him, make him uncomfortable. The second thing Alabama needs to do is make him win the game by himself. Georgia's rushing game is not bad by any means, but they haven't nearly been what we thought they would be. They haven't, so far through 3 games, have not nearly been what they've been in years past. I think Alabama can shut down Zamir White. I think they can shut down this Georgia rushing attack, meaning Stetson Bennett has got to go out there and do it all by himself. All by himself. I don't know if he can do that. Alabama takes away the run game. They continue to pressure Bennett consistently. You might force him into a few errant throws, where in a game like this, whoever wins the turnover battle could very well win the game. Offensively for Alabama, you have got to stay not just balanced, but you've got to stay multi-dimensional here. We're talking about defensively for you. You need to make Georgia one-dimensional. You can't allow that to happen against this type of defense. You've got to get that passing game going, and you've got to get Najee Harris going on the ground. He had 200 yards on the ground last week against Ole Miss. I promise that won't happen. I think Alabama will be lucky if Harris can hit 100. I think he'll be lucky if Harris can get 100 rushing yards in this game. But if you're not going to get him involved on the ground, get him involved in the passing game. Kind of similar to our key last week for Clemson Miami. We said Travis Etienne might not be able to run much against the Hurricanes. We were wrong. But in that game, we said if he's not able to run against that very stout Miami rushing defense, get him involved in the pass game. That's what Alabama needs to do here with Harris. And we've seen them do that multiple times this season. And it's very effective when they do that. And then finally for Alabama, before we get to Georgia's keys, take shots with Mac Jones. They haven't been afraid to do it all year. Do not be afraid to do it now. Georgia has allowed 3 offensive touchdowns this season. Just 3. All 3 of their offensive touchdowns have been by 25 yards or more, all through the air. Let that sink in. 3 offensive touchdowns, which that is an impressive stat in and of itself. But the fact that all 3 of those touchdowns have come through the air by 25 yards or more, not all in garbage time or anything like that. Keep that in mind. That's a bit of a concern for this Georgia secondary, especially when you're facing the talent and the speed and the great route running and the great arm of Mac Jones and his Alabama wide receivers. So take shots with Mac Jones early. Do not be afraid to test this Georgia secondary early and get that home crowd on your side. Get them fired up early in this game. Georgia, what is your key? We mentioned it earlier. We'll say it again. Dominate that time of possession. Continue to own that edge in the time of possession. The longer you keep Alabama off the field, the better. The longer Mac Jones is off that field, the longer he can't score. So dominate the time of possession. Make sure you're converting on 3rd downs. Move the ball methodically. Move it slow with your offense. When you do that, when you get going with your offense, make sure you get points out of it. Don't take 7 or 8 minutes off the clock if you can get a drive lasting that long and then go miss a field goal or get stuffed on the goal line. Georgia, if you're going to own the time of possession, you've got to make sure you get points out of it, especially in a setting, an environment like this. That's so big. And I know many people, especially Georgia fans, wish this game was in Athens because things maybe could be a little bit different. Another thing that Georgia has to do is make open field tackles. We mentioned how great these Alabama receivers are. We mentioned how elusive Najee Harris is. Again, in a game like this, you can't allow Alabama to pick up crucial third down conversions. Just pick up first downs because you missed a tackle or you got juked out in the open field. Or Alabama completes a deep slant across the middle. It's a 20-yard game, but you instead let them get 45 yards off the play because you don't tackle. You don't wrap up, whatever it may be. Make those open field tackles. Don't allow Alabama to get any extra yards than they should. Don't let them get any extra yards than they should. Alabama very dangerous with those receivers and Harris. Quick screen pass out to the left or the right. Do a great job blocking. What should be a 2 or 3 yard pickup could turn into an 11 or 12 yard pickup. Can't let that happen. Cannot let that happen. So do not miss your tackles. Make your open field tackles. That's a key for everybody, but more so than anything right now for Georgia. So what's going to happen on Saturday night? Tuscaloosa, primetime CBS, under the lights, Bryant-Denny Stadium, number 3 versus number 2. Playoff implications, SEC championship implications. I mean, guys, this is the only ranked versus ranked matchup of Week 7. Obviously, the best game of Week 7 has a chance to be the best game of the year. Let's hope that it lives up to that hype. So what's going to happen on Saturday night? It's a tough game to pick. I was back and forth on it. It's back and forth between the Bulldogs and the Crimson Tide. Got two great coaches in Kirby Smart and Nick Saban. Got Alabama's great offense versus Georgia's great defense. Which one's going to give here? But in this game, I'm rolling with the Crimson Tide. I am rolling with the Tide. I believe that Alabama's defense makes just enough plays to win this game. And you would say, well, Alabama's defense, what about their offense? Georgia, we have the best defense in the country, and you do. You had a really good defense last year, though. You got torched by LSU and Joe Burrow in the SEC championship game. Not comparing LSU and Joe Burrow to this Alabama team, but we have seen multiple times under Kirby Smart where they do have a great defense and they get torched by a very electric offense. Multiple times over the career of Kirby Smart. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. On the road against this type of offense that shows no signs of slowing down, I think you will see that. I think Alabama's defense picks off Stetson Bennett for the first time this season. You might see both teams commit one turnover. You might only see one team commit one turnover. But in the end, I think it's Alabama. If they don't tie, it's Alabama that wins that turnover battle. And remember, we said that whoever wins the turnover battle could very well win this game and will have a better chance of winning this game. Alabama's offense makes the most of their opportunities when they're out there on the field. I do think Georgia owns time of possession, but Alabama answers them right back if Georgia converts. And it's the Crimson Tide that go into this game and win by no more than 10 points. No more than 10 points. My gut's telling me it's 7 or less. My gut's telling me it's one possession. But there's no way Alabama wins by more than 10. I will be shocked. The nation will be shocked if that is the case. So a great matchup here Saturday night. The best game of the week. The best game of the year. The most highly anticipated game of the year. We're picking Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide by no more than 10. But we're really thinking one possession. And Saban remains undefeated against his former assistants. Alabama looking better and better as a college football playoff lock. Georgia going to have a little bit of work to do. Their room for error very slim with tough games coming ahead, especially with Florida lurking just a few weeks away. So a great matchup here, guys. Do not miss it. The best game of the week. Going with the Tide here. Leave your comments below. We want to hear from you as well. So guys, as always, thank you so much for watching us here at the Gridiron Expert. Make sure to continue to like, comment, subscribe, share our videos as well. Check out everything down in that description below, too. If you love college football, you're going to love everything down in the description. Our Against the Spread picks over on our website, thegridironexpert.com. Sign up for those. Sign up for the newsletter. Use our promo code GRIDIRON over on Bet Now. Go to our Patreon account for exclusive content as well. So many college football news and content and offers that you don't want to miss if you love the sport, right down there in the description. So make sure to give it a look. And once again, guys, as always, thank you so much for watching. And we'll see you next time right here on the Gridiron Expert.